Hey, everybody. I am really excited to be with you, and even more excited that we get to be with Stacey Abrams, who's going to be joining us in just a moment. So we'll let this thing get warm and allow some folks to join us. And we're still about 2 minutes from when Stacey Abrams is going to join us. But we're going to be able to talk about democracy, about voting rights, about these voting and elections bills that have passed or are pending in state legislatures all over the country, including in Texas, and what it is we can do about it. And we're going to hear directly from one of, if not the leader on the issue of voting rights and democracy in this country right now, Stacey Abrams. So I am, if I'm not looking you eye to eye, it's because I'm looking to see if Stacey's trying to join. And when she does, we'll bring her up here. I'm a little, and I'll also warn you, I'm a little rusty. I have not used Instagram Live in a really long time, and I've not hosted a conversation. So let's see. Yeah, Stacey may not yet be with us. And look, if you also want to ask a question of Stacey Abrams, there's the question function at the bottom, and you're welcome to pose your question there. And I'll do my best to get to as many of them as I can. We're going to have Stacey for a limited period of time, so I'm going to try to get to as many of the most interesting topics that I can with her, and then I'm going to try to get as many of your questions, especially the good ones, as I can. Here we go. I think I see Stacey. Here she. Stacey,
Hello, hello.
it's so good to see you.
You as well.
Thank you for doing this and joining us. Are you in Georgia right now?
I am indeed.
Okay. And how are things there?
Well, we still have democracy for a while. How about you guys?
We're good. Our kids are finishing the school year. They're distance learning from home. Everyone in the family is healthy and safe, and so I feel very grateful for that. And like you, I'm also perhaps because it's so close to being compromised. I'm really grateful that we still have democracy in Texas. As tough as the situation is now, we still have time to act, and so I want to be grateful for that. And very, very excited that I'm with you. I was just telling our viewers that if there is a leader, if there is a champion in the fight for democracy in America right now, it is you. And at a moment that we need some serious hope and bucking up here in Texas after we came perilously close to the passage of one of the most voter suppressive bills in the country, I think folks want to know what they can do and whether or not there's any hope left for them. So we are so happy to have you here. If you don't mind, Stacey, I'd love to dive right in and
Absolutely.
share a little bit, and I know you know this, but for our viewers, a little bit about what we face here in Texas and get your thoughts and see how it compares to Georgia and Florida and Iowa and all the other states that are trying this. In Texas, they nearly passed a bill that would have eliminated Sunday morning voting, also known as souls to polls, disproportionately targeting and affecting Black voters in Texas. They were going to make it harder for shift workers to vote, those who get off work at 2 a.m. or 4 a.m. in a state whose minimum wage is $7.25 an hour wouldn't be able to do that anymore. Voters with disabilities would have to tell complete strangers in the elections department what their disability is. And so I think of somebody with clinical depression or military sexual trauma after having served our country who may not want to disclose that, may want to keep it private, and what that would mean to them. They would allow poll watchers free reign inside the polling places. And perhaps most alarmingly, there was a provision that would allow Texas to overturn elections based on the allegation of fraud. Tell me how that sounds to you compared to what you're seeing in Georgia and in other places around the country.
Well, first of all, Benno, thank you so much for hosting this. Thank you for the work that you have led. And I want to be very specific. The work that you've led in Texas, the ways you've worked with so many groups and communities to leverage your opportunities to expand participation and awareness. And so it is always a pleasure for me to be in this work with you. So I want to make sure we said that first. What you described in Texas is being replicated across the country, and the targets are every state they can get to, but specifically any state that is either considered a swing state, soon to be swing state, a might be swing state, or a swung away from them and they want it back state. And what we need to look for are three things. One is anti-voting provisions. And those are the things you describe about eliminating access to early voting. We talk about it in terms of, can you register, can you stay on the rolls, and can you cast your ballot? And so within the anti-voting universe, they are attacking wherever they can your ability to register and stay on the rolls, your ability to cast a ballot, and your ability to have that ballot counted. So in Georgia, in Texas, in Florida, they've gone after early voting. In Arizona and in Georgia, they've gone after absentee balloting. They are finding ways to make it difficult for people to get their ballots in and get their ballots counted. In Georgia, one of the most egregious provisions that doesn't get talked about that much is that if you vote out of precinct, they will not count your ballot, and under certain provisions. And the problem with that is that Georgia has a habit of changing precincts the day of. One of the things that we did through Fair Fight was we actually had people standing outside holding up signs saying, wrong precinct, go the other way. But if you've got an hour and the bus that you took you to the wrong part of town and you can't get another bus, that means that instead of going in and voting in the precinct you thought you were supposed to vote in because that's where you voted for 20 years, you can possibly lose the right to vote despite the federal government putting in place this provisional ballot opportunity. So that's the first big nut. Anti-voting provisions, absentee balloting, early voting, being able to register and stay registered, not having your votes purged, your names purged off the rolls. That's the first big bucket. The second big bucket is attacks on election workers. And Texas is doing this, Georgia's doing this. Across the country, we are seeing them try to turn the screws on the very people who do the hardest work on election day. Those are the people who have to listen to every person who shows up and says, I was supposed to be on the rolls, I voted in the same place. That person who has to find your name, and whether it's a malfunction at the Secretary of State's office or a glitch in the technology or simply a mistake that someone made, they're going to make it harder for election workers to do their jobs. And in fact, we see some places where they're trying to criminalize election workers. The argument being that if a mistake is made, instead of blaming the system and those with power, they're going to blame the workers who have the least amount of power and the least amount of authority. So that's number two. And to your point about poll watchers, that is to directly intimidate not just voters, that's to intimidate election workers. If you know that someone can come in, stand over your shoulder, and basically accuse you of all manner of poor behavior, your likelihood of doing the job diminishes, and your likelihood of giving the voter the benefit of the doubt also diminishes. So what's happening to voters, what's happening to election workers, and the third, and what should terrify anyone of conscience, let's presume that you don't care about the workers and you don't care about the people. They can subvert elections, and that's the big piece that is being so dramatically pushed in ways that should terrify everyone. In Texas, it's the ability to throw out an election on the allegation of fraud with no proof. In Georgia, it's the ability of the state elections board to basically take over an elections board, to decide that a county didn't do it right under their estimation, and the rules are so thin that they can make up an excuse, and by doing so, they can possibly overturn an election. Now, the other side will say, well, we didn't say that. You don't have to say that. You were in the legislature, I'm in the legislature. If the laws are porous, that's not just a bad thing for the law, that's a bad thing for the victims of those laws. And the ability for Republicans, and it's largely being done by Republicans, to overturn elections they don't care about should terrify them, not only because progressives and liberals might be winning, but they may not like the kind of Republican. Let's think about what they're doing to Liz Cheney. Let's think about what they want to do to Mitt Romney. Let's think about every one of the Republicans who voted to impeach Donald Trump. Those are all people who could now have their election subverted by a group of people who simply decide that their minds and their voices and their theories of the case should be more valuable to the democratic process than a single vote. So that's it. Look at all these laws to see, does it affect voters, does it affect election workers, and does it subvert democracy?
Stacey, one of the viewers, Denise Payne, is asking a question about how this connects to everything else that we care about in life. In other words, I was thinking on Memorial Day, you know, men and women have given their lives to protect this country and our democracy. Civil rights leaders have risked and given their lives for this country and our democracy. That alone is probably motivating enough for most, but could you break it down for the person who's going to be affected by the school board election, or the ability to vote for their city council representative, or who cares about reproductive rights in a state like Texas where they're under attack? What voting means apart from, or maybe in addition to the fact that it's a fundamental part of democracy, it's how you choose the policies that are going to affect you in your life. Could you talk a little bit about that to Denise's question?
Sure. And Denise, thank you for asking the question. Here's how I think about it. I've been working on voting rights since I was 17. It is not because I enjoy walking into a voting booth and casting a ballot is just sort of the greatest moment of my life. It is what that ballot represents. I grew up in working class poverty in southern Mississippi, and the only way to change the structural infirmities in my community, my parents did what they could. We volunteered. We did all the things we could do as individual citizens, but our collective power as voters is expressed by casting a ballot and picking our leaders. I want us to always be clear. Voting is not magic, and anyone who tells you it's going to solve their problems is either misunderstanding where we live or lying to you. Voting is medicine, and we have to think about it that way. Every ill, every ism, every disease that we see in our society that we want to tackle, voting is our medicine. And the reason we do it over and over again is because we've got to take the medicine over and over again. And the minute we stop taking the medicine, the disease recurs. The illness reaffirms itself and is more aggressive. And so if you're thinking about your school board, if you lived in a school district that in the midst of COVID-19 did not care about the fact that the children in the community did not have access to devices, you need a school board that actually cares about your children. If you live in a community, if you live in a state that's trying to roll back reproductive choice, that is an economic and a moral and a health issue. And those choices are going to be made by the people who get picked for the state legislature. If you care about whether there is access to affordable housing, those are choices made by those who make zoning decisions in your county. And so almost everything we care about, everything we do, where we can't do it ourselves, we have to have leaders who basically collect all of our ideas and try to deliver what we need. That's what voting does. But the bottom line is this: we are not guaranteed everything we want. But the part of being in a democracy as a citizen is you are guaranteed a voice in at least expressing your displeasure, expressing your pain, and expressing your desires. And that's why voting matters. And that is why they're being so intentional and so deliberate about wresting that control, because what they've heard the people say over the last 10 years do not conform to the narrative that they've been trying to build for the last 40 years. We don't deserve to have our voices stolen by those who simply don't like what we say. And that's why we have to vote.
One of the things I take from your description of the crisis that we're in right now and the threat that we face is that it's not as if, we'll give it our best, and if we don't succeed in stopping these voter suppression or anti-democracy or anti-voter measures, that we can just, try again next year or next election cycle. I think you're making a real case that not only does this impact every part of your life and what it means to live in a democracy, but that we might very well lose this and not get it back. That point you made about overturning elections, so many actually tried to overturn the lawfully, legitimately, democratically decided 2020 election, took it to court in Pennsylvania, called the Secretary of State in Georgia, the President of the United States doing that, his attorney, Rudy Giuliani, doing that. You could have in these state legislatures new laws that essentially give them some kind of legal cover for doing that through official channels. So this is a question we're getting from a lot of people on the Instagram Live. Renee is asking, what can I do if I'm not in Georgia or Texas? Somebody else asked, what can I do? I live in Michigan and I want to help you all, but it sounds like it's a Texas fight or a Georgia fight. What can folks be doing right now?
Number one, we need to realize this is an American fight. And while Republicans may be the current purveyors of voter suppression, we've seen this movie before. And post-Reconstruction, it was Democrats who did it. And at the inception of our nation, it was the Federalists When a party has power and does not want to share that power, their instinctive response is not to up their game, but to change the game, to change the rules. That's what we're facing. And so while it started in Georgia, we were their practice shot. They're on their way to Michigan. They're on their way to Ohio. They're going to be in Pennsylvania, in North Carolina. There is a concerted effort by the Heritage Action Fund for America to pass these laws everywhere they can. So be clear, if they haven't gotten to you yet, you're on the list. The reason that's an important point to understand is that this is what we need you to do. Number one, we need you to go to stopjimcrow2.com. Stopjimcrow2.com. There are those who say that's being hyperbolic, but I'm telling you it's not. What Jim Crow did, what the Jim Crow laws regarding voting did, there was never a single voting law in America post-Reconstruction that used race as the reason to stop you from voting. Instead, they targeted behaviors that were more likely to be used by Black voters. And they created the grandfather clause to exempt anyone whose grandfather was allowed to vote before the Civil War. That did not include any Black person because the 15th Amendment didn't give us the right to citizenship. So I say that to say this. StopJimCrow2.com is about the national imperative. One, we need everyone to talk about this. Whether it's come to where you live yet or not, we have to talk about it as though it is imminent wherever you live. It includes California. So we've got to be able to say over and over again, this is real. The Republicans are doing an extraordinary job of filling in the narrative and talking about, they're telling the big lie. They're telling the big lie with such fervor that instead of us moving away from people believing that moving towards understanding that the election was free and fair, they're moving actually further away. So our voices have to be just as strong. And that means not just on your Twitter page or on Facebook, but every social media you use, amplify the importance of voter freedom, amplify the importance of voting rights, talk about voter suppression, use HR 1, the For the People Act. But if you go to Jim Crow, we'll give you the language to use, but we've got to amplify this so this is a national conversation. They are successful when they convince us that it's parochial, that it's only happening to some people. It's only happening in the South. It's only happening to Black people. No, this is happening to all of us. And so we all have to be heard. Number two, we need to absolutely support groups that are doing the work to fight back. Where you live, there's someone fighting for voting rights, help them. And then number three, we've got to support the federal legislation, the For the People Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. We've got to push Congress to act, and we've got to build the national clamor that says that we will not rest until we get this done. Much in the way we behaved when we wanted those stimulus checks, if we want democracy to continue, we've got to keep this up. StopJimCrow2.com will tell you all about it, and now I'm done.
StopJimCrow2.com. Go there, learn what you can do. I love the very defined actions you can take, including supporting the For the People Act, which, Stacey, if I think about the original Jim Crow, so much of what was pernicious about it was this idea that it applied to everyone. You know, the poll tax, that applies to everyone, Black and white. The literacy test, Black and white. You mentioned the grandfather clause, which was this exception for white voters in the South, in the former Confederacy. In that same way, you know, in Texas, the authors of SB 7, the voter suppression bill here, would say, Beto, this is just a bill to standardize elections. Now, who could be against standardizing elections? We just want to make sure we have the right number of polling places, you use the appropriate ID, that we don't allow fraud in any sense. But you're so right to point out the effect and the outcome, and who ultimately is targeted and who ultimately will pay the price in our democracy. And in Texas, it's Black voters, it's voters of color, it's young voters, it's the very old, it's those who live in big cities. And I think you also made a great point. It also affects everyone. If you really want this government of, by, and for the people to work, when you start cutting out parts of the people, you no longer have democracy and you no longer have this government. The last Jim Crow was ultimately met by the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And Stacey, I recently taught a class at Texas State, and on Texas politics, and I asked my students to watch LBJ's speech on, I believe it was March 15th of 1965 to a joint session of Congress, and where he's making the case for the Voting Rights Act. He cites, without naming him, but we all know who he's talking about. He talks about John Lewis. He said a week ago, referring to Bloody Sunday, there were those who were willing to lay down their lives and very nearly did for the right to vote. And he kind of challenges Congress. You know, we have the power to deliver on that and to be worthy of their sacrifice and their struggle. And in some ways, though, as a proud Texan, you know, I want LBJ to get some of that credit. I think as a student of history, I realized that really it was John Lewis and Fannie Lou Hamer and every civil rights and voting rights champion who essentially forced LBJ to do that. And thankfully, LBJ was open to being forced to do that. What are you seeing enough of that forcing action in America right now? I know President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris absolutely want to do this. They're supportive of the For the People Act. They see the problem. The president spoke about it yesterday in commemorating the 100th anniversary of the Tulsa massacre. But are we seeing enough public pressure? And if not, Stacey, what do you want us to do? What can people do to give voice to that urgent message about getting the For the People Act passed?
So I did a documentary last year called All In, and there's this amazing interview with Ambassador Andrew Young, who was a part of the same coterie that included John Lewis and Martin Luther King Jr. And he tells a story of going to see LBJ and having this conversation about voting rights. And the president said, I just don't have the power. I don't have the power to move this bill. I don't have the power to get this done. And so when Martin Luther King and Andrew Young left the White House, Andrew said to Martin, you know, what do we need to do? And Martin Luther King said, well, we just got to find the president some power. And there's this moment where you're just like, what do you mean? But we are the power. And it's not it's not hyperbole. This is not idealism. We have to create such a clamor that to do otherwise, to do anything other than save our democracy from these, to use your word, pernicious laws, is to do a disservice to our country. And that is why it's so important for us to talk about it. And it feels facile, it feels too weak, it feels like an ineffective approach. But that's what Bloody Sunday was. It was the telling of a story on national television about the vicious nature of voter suppression. It had been happening for decades, 150 years. But it took that image, that moment, for people to understand it. Well, we don't want another Bloody Sunday. But what we can do is use our digital platforms, our conversations, our newspapers, our televisions. We can use our radio stations to talk about this issue. A lot of us think, well, that's not what I do, or this is not for me. It is for you. If you like living in a nation where you have a hope of having a voice and making decisions about who you are and who your children will get to be, this is about you, because we've got this really, I think, naive notion that nothing can happen to American democracy. I send everyone's attention back to the last 4 years. Everything we thought could not happen here that happened in 4 years, imagine if it can happen without any impediment from voters over the next 20 years. Because that's about as long as it will take for the number of people in this country to amass enough votes to overwhelm the current imbalance that we have. And so we've got to talk about it. We've got to get the president the power he needs. And that comes from everyday citizens talking about this, not letting this fade into the ether or become the 5th or 10th or 400th thing we care about. This has to be front and center, because everything else you care about emanates from the ability to have our democracy made strong by participation.
I love what you just said, and it couldn't have come at a better time, because one of the things that troubled me about President Biden's comments yesterday, which were excellent, but he said, "Look, I'm just one guy. What can I do? I don't have control over these senators." In other words, he was saying maybe something akin to what LBJ said back in '65. I don't have the power to do this, and so I love what you just said. You challenged all of us to help the president find the power. We need him to have that power, and we've got to do our part where it just becomes so clear to him, to the members of the Senate, to the country, that this is together our priority as Americans, not as Georgians or Texans or even Democrats or Republicans, but this great country that has yet to realize its full promise and potential, certainly when it comes to democracy. We can still do this. We can still get it right. And we should also be mindful, as Stacey reminded all of us, that we are under attack, whether it's what passed and was signed into law in Georgia, what they're trying to pass in Texas, and thank God for the Texas House Democrats who bought us some time on Sunday night where we can still fight this, or the insurrection attempt on the 6th of January. Democracy is under direct attack right now. And we all need to find that power, and we need to give the president and those who represent us in the Congress that power so they can do the right thing while we still have time to do the right thing. Stacey, we're going to let you go, but I wanted to just ask you, at moments like probably you've had in Georgia and we have here in Texas, where we're tempted to despair, we're in a fairly deep minority. We know the governor's going to call the legislature back into a special session, and that god-awful voter suppression bill, they tell us it's going to get worse and may even involve some voter list purges, as you had to live through in Georgia. What gives you hope right now, and what hope do you want us to take from this moment, and then how do we convert that into some action and into some power?
I think hope is important as a lodestar, but I focus on determination. We have to fix this problem, and we don't have the luxury of not doing so. But the most important part to me is that we're not in this alone. This conversation is part of thousands of conversations happening. And when we feel like we're proselytizing or whining or overwhelming our friends, we've got to remember that we now possess information that other people need, because they don't have time to necessarily think about what's happening with SB 7, but they do have time to worry about whether their kids are going to be able to go to a school and learn about their own heritage. That while they're fighting over these conversations of infrastructure, we're talking about whether or not that broken bridge is going to kill somebody. These are real issues, and they all come from who we elect as our leaders. I believe that this can be done because I grew up in Mississippi, in Georgia, lived in Texas. I got confused and went to the north for a minute, but I came back south as soon as humanly possible. And what I know is that I am the legacy of people. My grandfather, my mother's father, was born in 1887. He was born 20 years after the end of slavery, my grandfather. And I don't have the luxury of not believing more is possible, because I am proof that more is possible. We are proof that even in the darkest moments that challenge our nation, when we rise up together, not in insurrection, but in resurrection of our ideals, when we are willing to fight for who we say we are, we can win. And that keeps me going, because I get to talk to folks like you and folks like those who are on this Instagram. And every day, more and more people realize what is at stake, but that we have the right to our values, to our freedom, and to our nation. And that is patriotism at its most basic.
Well, whether you call it determination or hope, you just gave it to us. And I feel a renewed effort inside to be part of that resurrection of our democracy and to make sure that we do this. Last thing, I know that some part of your heart is in Texas, and I know that Texas certainly loves you. And I hear that all the time, everywhere I go. I'm going to be on the road for the next 3 weeks in Texas, taking this conversation to Midland and Abilene and Wichita Falls and South Dallas, Houston, Austin, San Angelo, El Paso. If at any point you're wanting to get back to Texas and join us, we would love to have you. And even more, the people of Texas would love to see you and hear you. But even if you don't, please know that what you have been saying and what you've been working on, and most importantly, what you've been doing, has been resonating in this state. And no small part of what the Texas legislature, the Democrats in the Texas legislature did in defeating SB 7 was owing to you and the example and the leadership you provided. And so I just, on behalf of Texas, I want to say thank you. And thanks for joining everybody on Instagram today. Please keep up the great work and let us know at any point how we can help you.
Just keep doing what you're doing. Thank you all.
Adios, Stacey. Bye-bye. Wow, that was the conversation I needed. I hope it's the conversation that you all wanted, and I hope you take every word of guidance from Stacey that she just gave us. Whether it's hope, whether it's determination, we have to act, and we don't have much time left to us before this window on democracy closes. Whether it's the voter suppression bills that are coursing through the state legislatures in 47 states. That's almost all of them, or those that have passed in Georgia and Florida and in Iowa. Whether it was the direct violent attack on our democracy on January 6th, or the conspiracies being spread right now by those who were formerly in positions of power and public trust. This one is on all of us, and it's going to take all we've got, all we have, right where we are right now, right at this moment, right? So support the For the People Act. Reach out to President Biden, let him know you support it. And if you're in Texas, join us. We're going to be coming to your community very soon. And you can go to Powered X People, and Cynthia or someone from the team, if you will put that in the comments, I will pin it. Let me see if I can do this right now. Powered.people.org. Sorry, I'm trying to manage Instagram and do this. All right, I pinned that comment there. But whatever you do, do something, right? In Texas, you can become a volunteer deputy registrar. You can support Stacey's organization, Fair Fight in Georgia, or StopJimCrow2.com, which is the site that she gave us. Or as Stacey suggested, tell a friend, talk to a family member. Let them know this is the fight of our lives. Thank you all so much for joining us this evening. Special thanks to Stacey Abrams for making some time for the people of Texas and the people of Instagram. Hope you all are well, and we hope to see you again soon. Next time you'll be seeing me, I'll be on the road in Texas as we bring this conversation to every part of the state. Until then, be well. Adios.